Welcome to Little Bad Daddy's Den. This is our MS interview with Master Skip and Slavery. We are at the Southwest Conference here in Phoenix, Arizona. Hello, Skip. Hello, Rick.
How do?
So first, what is a master? What is a slave?
Well, if you ask that question of 10 people, you'll get 10 different answers. So speaking for myself, we're talking about archetypal roles that are complementary. And for myself, as a master, I've made a commitment to foster the development and growth of those in service to me. And I'm entitled to use all the tools and techniques and skills that I've developed over the years, whether they're leather skills or life skills, and with a very specific agenda to develop this man and others to be the best they can be.
What is a slave?
Well, if you would have asked me this 15 years ago, I would have given you a very different answer. I've been in service to Master Skip for about 15 and a half years, and initially had a lot of trouble with the word slave and trouble seeing myself as slave because of my background. Coming from a Jewish background, slaves were something we talked about at Passover Seders, and it was about non-consensual slavery. Consensual slavery is something very different. That's really about where my heart is. It's really about discovering for me a bhakti energy, a worshipful energy, a devotional energy that not only that I feel toward this man, but that gets expressed in my life through service, through supporting the growth and awakening of all beings, that gets expressed in ways that allow me to just be an open vessel and be used. You know, one of the things that I've learned in this relationship, initially it wasn't easy to take orders from another person. I made a very conscious choice because I'm a pretty dominant kind of guy in my life, and I made a conscious choice to be obedient to Master Skip once I recognized him as my master. And learning to be obedient to those orders has developed my ability to be obedient to my own inner orders, my higher orders, the orders of my higher self, if you will. And it's become much more fluid to do that because of the practice that I've gotten in this relationship, because what has been modeled for me in this relationship.
And I just want one thing I want to make sure with all this, fluffy talk we've just said. At the core, our relationship is rooted in consensual authority and obedience. I'm the authority figure in the relationship. I give the directives. He's compliant. So I get to decide how things are going to go in our lives and in our relationship.
And I just want to say that one of the things that's really facilitated for me as slave is what it means to live a more surrendered life. Not only a surrendered life to my master, but a surrendered life in general.
So for some of the newer people out there watching this YouTube video, there's a difference between seeing as a master slave and living it 24/7. The reason I ask this question is, when were you drawn into the scene to go from role playing into 24/7?
Oh, that's, we don't have time in the interview for me to tell you my full story in that regard, but a quick background is I have been a practicing Leatherman to one degree or another for nearly 40 years. And it's been less than 20 years that I've been engaged in primary relationships rooted in consensual dominance and submission. In fact, early on in my life, I wanted nothing to do with it. I thought it was hogwash. I thought it would kill my fun. So I wanted nothing to do with it. Speaking for myself, as fantastic as it may sound, it was a spiritual calling. And it was a calling that I ran from, that, again, I thought was just going to really screw up my life. And through a series of events that culminated in, I'll simply say, a mystical experience, I surrendered. I accepted my calling, and as part of that, I actually took vows. And so that's how it happened for me. That's not the normal story. If you ask somebody else, you're going to get a very different story.
Okay, so going with that, with you, it was a spiritual calling. It wasn't something you wanted.
Correct. It wasn't something I sought out.
So if you were to give some of the newer, what I want to call D types, dominant types, that get asked by perhaps a new person, drop to their knees and say, I want to be your slave, what would you suggest to those newer people that got their dicks hard? What would you suggest to them? A piece of advice that you would...
The first thing, anybody who truly possesses a slave archetype, for whom it's also a calling. They don't even have to have a spiritual consciousness. If this is how they're wired, and this is the only thing that's going to make them happy, the first thing is you got to have your life in order. You've got to be so entirely self-sufficient that you actually have something of value to offer another. Otherwise, you're just a liability. You're just another responsibility. And the problem I see is many people, and this includes many legitimate slaves and legitimate submissives, whether they intend to or not, use their submissiveness or their slavery as a way to avoid responsibility. And for me, it's just the opposite. It's about being hyper-responsible. Because until you're a fully functioning adult with a really, a strong sense of yourself and to know that you can make your way in the world, you've got nothing to offer in service to someone else. So that's the first thing I would say is, get your house in order.
That's great. For you, what drew you from going hot to wanting to do this 24/7, to commit yourself?
My path was a little bit different. I did not have any experience in the BDSM world. And I heard someone speak at a men's gathering about Heart of Slave. And as he spoke, it so deeply touched me that I started to cry. It was the first time I had ever heard anything about this. And I approached him afterward, and through a series of events, I came to attend a weekend workshop called Path of the Obedient Heart, and Master Skip was co-facilitating that weekend. And as soon as I met Master Skip, I had this inner voice speak to me that said, he's the one. And my mind went absolutely berserk because it made no sense to me. He didn't look like the type of person I was normally attracted to. I thought he was a really confident man, and I was attracted to that, but something about him really drew me. And before that weekend ended, as I watched him over that weekend, and I just saw this depth of integrity, depth of love, depth of commitment. I saw the way that he interacted with other people, and I wanted to be one of those people. And I didn't want the weekend to end without having a way to have contact with him. And I went up to him at the end of the weekend, and I'm usually pretty articulate and really clear about what I want and able to say what I want. I didn't know what to ask for. I just broke down into tears. And it caught his attention. And this was my first entry into this world, my experience with Master Skip. I had no prior background in BDSM at all. And it evolved from there. It really set in motion a war within all, a war that I believe is within all of us. It's kind of a war between our head and our heart. It's like my heart was saying one thing, but my head had all these rational reasons why this didn't make any sense to pursue this path. And luckily, over time, I learned that my heart is what's trustworthy, not my head.
So the next question. If you could say a couple things as to masters out there to help them dominate from a place of love, and if you could say a couple things to slaves out there of how they can learn to serve from a place of power, what would they be?
Well, that's an easier question. There's a lot more literature around now than there was when I first, started pursuing the clandestine world of Leathermen and leather sex many, many years ago. And a lot of that literature, you'll read things like, a master's number one responsibility is to protect the property. That's not the truth for me. My number one priority, first and foremost, is the deepening of my own spiritual awakening. I believe the more awake I am as an individual, the better master I'll be, the better human being I'll be. I would have twofold advice to, new dominants and new masters, to focus first and foremost on deepening their own spirituality, their own awakening, their own enlightenment, for lack of a better word, and that's an ongoing process. And number two, to make a really strong commitment to only do that which is for the greater good of their slaves, of those in service to them. Under the rules of the game, theoretically, we're entitled to do whatever we want, or whatever those who negotiate the relationships, whatever they've negotiated. But I've said for a long time, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And so to get really clear about what your responsibilities are, and I'll reiterate, to only do that which is for the greater good, consciously. I mean, nobody's perfect, but that only consciously do that which is for the greater good of your slave.
And I would say, first and foremost, that a slave should be very discerning about who they offer the gift of their obedience and service to. I know there was a point in my life where I felt very needy and very hungry to be loved. And I think that can cause bad decisions. So it's really important to prepare yourself and allow yourself to be the best and most whole person that you can be, whether that means spiritual practice or psychotherapy. I'm a therapist. Whatever form that may take for you, do the inner work to prepare yourself so that when the right person shows up, as I believe they invariably will, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. When the slave is ready, the master appears. Doesn't mean there's not more growth to happen, but prepare yourself so that your discernment isn't compromised and so that you don't wind up in a situation that is really a masquerade of master and slave and is really abusive. And I've unfortunately seen that in my line of work. So that's what I would say.
And the final question. Your guys' particular model of master-slave is not the typical one. And you guys don't live together.
Correct.
What is the self-loving reason for that?
Well, that's my decision, because again, I get to make decisions about everything. I choose to only make the decisions about the things that matter to me, and then require him to make the decisions about everything else in his life. I have cohabitated when I have been in relationships, but I have a very strong hermit archetype, and I require a significant amount of solitude for balance. So that, coupled with the fact that I have multiple MS and DS relationships, so it's like, who do you decide, you live with me but you don't, do we all live together? That would be a nightmare. So that was the second criteria. And the third, because of the specific my specific angle with these types of relationships and what my agenda is, and because they go very deep and they're very intense, there is so much self-searching that has to continually go on, self-examination between the two of us, that if they were dependent upon the relationship to maintain the roof over their head, or if their obedience had any impact on the roof over their head, it's just one more thing that has to really be filtered through. And so it was important to me that this man and others know that they were not dependent upon maintaining their obedience to keep the roof over their head. So it was those three things together.
You know, I would say that the path of slavery is ultimately a path of freedom, because it's a path of learning to be as real and authentic as you can be. And some of the things that I have been conditioned to believe we should do in our life, like live with the person that we're in primary relationship with, that was an issue for me at the start of our relationship. I just assumed we would eventually live together. But as time has gone on, I've come to see that not only is that Master Skip's order that we not, but it's actually my preference as well. I really value my space and my time and my home and keeping it the way that I want it. So as much as Master Skip values his alone time, I value my alone time as well. And I actually find that very supportive and nurturing for me to have that space, so that whenever I do come together with Master Skip, which is frequent, I can be as clear and grounded and loving as possible.
I mean, what's interesting is everybody has moved very close to me. He lives 10 minutes away, Pup Tim lives 5 minutes away. My boy Chris, at the time, lived about 50 miles away, so he moved halfway between where he worked and where I live. And they all have keys and alarm codes to my house. But ultimately, it's my home. And, you know, they're welcome in it, but it's my home. And they have their homes.
Thank you so much for your
You're
time.
welcome. You're welcome.
Now, all you new people out there, I encourage you to do some research on different archetypes. This is only one, and here are some things to think about.